Saipan, June 1944. The air is thick with the metallic taste of blood and the constant, deafening roar of U.S. naval artillery. This is the world of Hana Kobayashi, a 22-year-old nurse in the Imperial Japanese Army. Every day, amidst the chaos of the field hospital, she tends to the mangled bodies of her comrades, men who were once boys, now just fragments of what they were. The ground trembles without pause. The sky is a canvas of smoke and fire. Each morning, the officers line them up, their faces grim, their voices like stone. The message is always the same. Americans are not human. They are demons. They torture. They desecrate. To be captured is the ultimate shame. Death is your only honor. This isn't just a warning. It's a commandment etched into their very souls. It's a belief so powerful, it outweighs the fear of death itself. So, Hana, like every other soldier and nurse, carries her salvation with her, a single hand grenade. Not for the enemy, but for herself. It's her final duty, her last act of loyalty to the Emperor and to her family back home. The American forces are closing in, the final defensive line. A desperate stand on the edge of a cliff is crumbling under the weight of the assault. The sounds of battle are a symphony of destruction, machine guns chattering, mortars screaming, and the cries of the dying. Hana is dragging a wounded soldier, his arm nearly severed, trying to pull him behind a cluster of shattered rocks. The air around her suddenly compresses, a blinding white light, and then a wave of force throws her to the ground. A searing, white-hot pain explodes in her left leg. She looks down. Her leg is a ruin of flesh and fabric, soaked in a crimson that's far too dark, far too much. The soldier she was trying to save is gone, lost to the blast. Se is alone. The sounds of Japanese resistance are fading, replaced by shouts in a language she doesn't understand but has been taught to fear above all else. English. They are coming. The demons are here. Panic claws at her throat. The officer's words echo in her mind. Capture is shame. Death is honor. Her fingers, trembling and slick with her own blood, find the cold, ridged surface of the grenade tucked into her belt. This is it. This is the moment she has prepared for. This is her honorable end. She closes her eyes, her hand tightening, her thumb pressing against the pin. She thinks of her mother's smile, the cherry blossoms in her village. A tear cuts a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Just as she's about to pull the pin, a shadow falls over her. She flinches, her eyes snapping open. A figure stands there, silhouetted against the fiery sky. An American. He's tall, his uniform is unfamiliar, and he carries a medical bag. He's a devil, she thinks, here to claim his prize, to inflict the horrors she's been promised. She presses harder on the grenade. A guttural sound of defiance and terror caught in her throat. But the man doesn't lunge. He doesn't shout. He kneels beside her, his movements slow, deliberate. He's saying something. His voice is low and steady, not the monstrous roar she expected. She can't understand the words, but the tone, it's not threatening. It's calm, urgent, but calm. This is Lieutenant Daniel Carter, a U.S. Navy medical officer. He sees her, a young woman bleeding out in the dirt. He sees the grenade in her hand, the terror in her eyes. Ignoring the grenade for a moment, his focus is entirely on her leg. He pulls out a pair of medical shears. Hana recoils. He's going to defile her. She's certain of it. Humiliation before death. He gently pushes her hand aside and begins to cut away the shredded, blood-soaked fabric of her uniform trousers. For Hana, this is an act of profound violation, a stripping of her dignity in her final moments. She braces for the cruelty, for the laughter, for the monstrousness, but it never comes. As her wound is exposed, she dares to look up at his face, and what she sees stops her cold. His expression isn't one of malice or triumph. His brow is furrowed in concentration. His eyes are focused, steady. They are filled with a deep, undeniable concern. He's not a demon. He's a doctor, a healer. He works quickly, applying a tourniquet, cleaning the wound with a practiced efficiency that speaks of countless hours spent saving lives, not taking them. He meets her gaze. And then he speaks, slowly, clearly, as if willing her to understand through the sheer force of his sincerity. "You're going to be okay," he says, and then he adds, as if making a sacred vow, "I promise." The words, in a language she doesn't know, somehow break through. They land in her heart, not her mind. And in that single, impossible moment, the first crack appears. In a lifetime of indoctrination, the world Shinua, world of absolute honor and monstrous enemies, begins to tilt on its axis. The grenade in her hand suddenly feels heavy, foreign. Her fingers, which moments ago were so determined to bring death, slowly, almost imperceptibly, begin to relax. In the middle of hell, she has not found a demon. She has found a man who promised to save her. And for the first time, she starts to wonder if everything she was taught to believe was a lie. This was not the end of her story. Guam, July 1944. The air is thick with the metallic smell of war and the heavy silence of defeat. As a Japanese nurse, I was prepared for the worst. Our propaganda, our training, everything had taught us that capture meant a fate worse than death. Americans were beasts, demons in human form who would show no mercy. So when the world went dark, I expected to wake up in a hell of their making. Torture, humiliation, a brutal end to a life spent in service. That was the script I had been given. Instead, I awoke to the startling sensation of clean bandages against my skin. The room was quiet, hushed, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battlefield. Soft light filtered through a window, and the air smelled of antiseptic, not blood. I was in a bed, a proper bed with clean white sheets. My wounds, which I had been sure would fester and kill me, were expertly dressed. This wasn't the torture chamber I had envisioned. This was a hospital. Nurses, American nurses, moved with a quiet efficiency that was both familiar and deeply unsettling. They would enter my room, and before speaking, they would offer a slight bow. A bow. A gesture of respect I had only ever seen among my own people. It was so small, so simple, but it shattered a piece of the monstrous image I held of my enemy. They spoke in gentle, measured tones, their English a foreign melody that carried no hint of malice. They checked my temperature, changed my dressings, offered me water, all with a professional kindness that was utterly disorienting. Where was the hate? Where was the brutality I had been promised? The propaganda had painted such a vivid, terrifying picture. It showed American soldiers as grinning monsters, devoid of honor or compassion. But the reality I was living was a gentle, quiet contradiction to everything I believed. Here, in this American Naval Hospital in Honolulu, I was being treated with a dignity that, if I'm being honest, I had rarely experienced even back home. The military hierarchy, the rigid social structures, they had always made me feel small, disposable. Here, as a prisoner, I was being seen. A young American doctor, Clotta, began to visit me regularly. He wasn't interrogating me or trying to extract information. He was just checking in. He had kind eyes and a smile that seemed to reach them, even when he looked tired. He must have known I didn't speak his language, because he started bringing small pieces of paper with him. On them, he would write English words, carefully spelled out phonetically in a way he thought I could pronounce. The first word he taught me was friend. He pointed to himself, then to me, and said it slowly, clearly. Friend. I stared at the word, at him, my mind reeling. The second word was safe. He gestured around the room, at the clean bed, the secure walls. Safe. The third word was alive. He placed a hand gently over his own heart, then motioned for me to do the same. Alive. Friend. Safe. Alive. These simple words were chipping away at the fortress of fear and hatred I had built around myself. They were a language of pure humanity, crossing the vast chasm of war that separated us. Days turned into weeks. My body healed under the care of these supposed monsters. My broken bones were set. My fever subsided, and the pain began to recede. But it was my mind, my soul, that was undergoing the more profound transformation. The constant, gnawing fear I had lived with for so long was slowly being replaced by a bewildering sense of gratitude. The quiet respect, the consistent care. Carter's daily visit was all an irrefutable testament to a truth I had been conditioned to deny. One afternoon, as Carter was checking my charts, I finally found the courage to speak. I had been practicing the words, stitching them together from the fragments he had taught me and the little English I knew. My voice was raspy, weak from disuse. "Why, help me?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I am your enemy." The question hung in the air, the culmination of all my confusion, all my doubt. I braced myself for the answer. Perhaps now the mask would drop. Perhaps now I would see the monster. Carter looked up from his clipboard. He didn't pause, didn't hesitate. His gaze was direct, and his response was immediate, as if the answer was the most obvious thing in the world. "You're a nurse," he said, his voice even and calm. "You save lives. That makes us the same. That makes us the same." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow, but a healing one. In that single simple sentence, he had dismantled the entire machinery of war that had defined my existence. He didn't see my uniform, my nationality, my allegiance. He saw my purpose. He saw the core of who I was, a healer, and in that, he found a reflection of himself. He saw our shared humanity. In that moment, the last of my fear didn't just fade, it crumbled into dust. It was like a dam breaking, and in the space where fear had been, something new and powerful rushed in. It was a recognition of a truth far more fundamental than any flag or any border. We were not just soldier and prisoner. We were not just American and Japanese. We were two people, caught on opposite sides of a terrible conflict, who had dedicated our lives to the same sacred act, preserving life. As my fear eroded, my humanity returned. The world, which had been painted in the stark, brutal colors of black and white, of us versus them, began to flood with color and complexity. I started to see the faces of the nurses not as the enemy, but as women, just like me, doing their job with compassion and skill. I saw Carter not as a soldier, but as a doctor, a man who had taken an oath. This hospital, this supposed prison, became my sanctuary. It was a place where I was not just kept alive, but where I was reborn. I had been sent to the front lines to serve my emperor, to fight for my nation. I had been taught to hate, to fear, and to die, if necessary. But here, at the hands of my enemy, I was learning the most profound lesson of all, that even in the darkest heart of war, the light of our shared humanity can not only survive. From the tropical shores of Guam, our story moves to a place of unexpected healing. The U.S. Naval Hospital in Honolulu. It's July 1944, and for Hana, a Japanese nurse captured by American forces, this journey is filled with dread. Every fiber of her being is braced for the worst. Propaganda has painted a horrifying picture of the enemy monsters, brutes who would show no mercy. She expects torture. She anticipates hatred, a violent end to a life dedicated to saving others. But when she finally awakens, the reality she finds is so profoundly different, it shatters her worldview. Instead of the rough hands of an interrogator, she feels the softness of clean bandages wrapped around her wounds. Instead of angry shouts, she hears only the quiet, respectful voices of the medical staff. The American nurses, her supposed tormentors, bow slightly when they enter her room. A gesture of deference and care that feels both alien and deeply familiar. She's given fresh clothes, warm meals, and a quiet space to recover. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Americans were supposed to be devils. Yet, in this sterile, white-walled hospital room, Hana is treated with more dignity and kindness than she has ever known. Evan Bach. The stark contrast between the brutal propaganda she was fed and the gentle reality she is experiencing creates a powerful sense of cognitive dissonance. Who are these people, and what do they want from her? Among the staff, one person stands out. Carter, the American soldier who found her. He visits her often, his presence a steady, reassuring constant in her disoriented world. He doesn't interrogate her or demand information. Instead, he offers her small gifts of language. He brings a notepad and carefully writes out English words for her, spelling them phonetically so she can practice. Words like friend, safe, and alive. These aren't the words of an enemy. They are the words of a human being reaching out to another. Each word is a small stone cast into the deep, dark well of her fear, sending ripples of confusion and, slowly, comfort. Hana begins to see the man behind the uniform, a person whose quiet kindness speaks volumes more than any military doctrine or nationalistic phrase. Through these simple lessons, a fragile bridge of communication is built between them, spanning the vast chasm of war and prejudice that separates their two worlds. As the days turn into weeks, and her physical wounds begin to heal, Hana's mind is in turmoil. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long starts to recede, but in its place, a consuming question grows. Why? Why this kindness? Why this care? They know who she is, a nurse for the Imperial Japanese Army. An enemy. She has seen the cost of this war, the lives lost on both sides. Why would they waste precious resources on someone they were supposed to hate? The logic of war dictated that she should be, at best, a prisoner, and at worst, eliminated. This gentle treatment made no sense. Finally, one afternoon, as Carter sits by her bedside, she musters the courage to ask the question that has been haunting her. Her English is hesitant, pieced together from the words he has taught her and the fragments she remembers. "Why help me?" she asks, her voice barely a whisper. "I am your enemy." She watches his face, expecting, perhaps, a flicker of hesitation, a sign that this kindness is just a strategic ploy, a mask hiding a darker purpose. But Carter's response is immediate, his gaze unwavering. He looks at her, not as a Japanese soldier, but as a person. "You're a nurse, a Swiss." Simply his voice filled with the conviction that cuts through all her doubts. "You save lives. That makes us the same." That single sentence lands with the force of a revelation. It redefines everything. In that moment, the labels of American and Japanese, of friend and enemy, dissolve into a... Carter isn't seeing her uniform or her nationality. He sees her profession, her shared purpose, her fundamental humanity. He sees a fellow healer in a world consumed by destruction. In his eyes, their shared calling to preserve life transcends the manufactured divisions of war. They are not enemies. They are colleagues, united by a sacred duty that knows no borders. For Hana, this is the turning point. The wall of fear and hatred, so carefully constructed by years of propaganda and the horrors of the battlefield, begins to crumble. It doesn't happen all at once, but piece by piece. The bricks of prejudice are dismantled by simple, undeniable acts of human decency. Where fear once resided, a new feeling begins to take root, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. In the sterile quiet of that hospital room, surrounded by her enemies, Hana rediscovers a profound truth. When we strip away the flags, the uniforms, and the rhetoric, what remains is our shared humanity. And where fear fades, humanity returns. Her journey is no longer just about physical survival. It is about the reclamation of her soul, the rediscovery of connection in the most unlikely of places. The war still rages outside the hospital walls, but within Hana, a different kind of battle is being won, a battle for the human spirit itself. This chapter in her life, from July to October of 1944, becomes a testament to the power of compassion to bridge even the widest divides. It shows that even in the darkest of times, when the world seems determined to tear itself apart, the choice to see the person instead of the enemy can change everything. Hana's story is a powerful reminder that our shared identity as human beings is far more important than any label that seeks to divide us. Her experience in Honolulu wasn't just about healing her body. It was about healing her belief in people, and in turn, herself. January 1946. The war was over. But for Hana, another battle was just beginning. She stepped off the repatriation ship and onto the soil of a Japan she no longer recognized. Her homeland was a nation in ashes. Tokyo, once a sprawling metropolis of light and life, was now a ghost city, its skyline jagged with the skeletons of bombed-out buildings. The air, thick with the smell of soot and decay, clung to her clothes, a constant reminder of the devastation. Everywhere she looked, she saw the human cost of the war. Families huddled in makeshift shelters, their faces gaunt from starvation. Children with eyes too old for their years roamed the ruble-strewn streets, their laughter replaced by a haunting silence. And the survivors. Oh, the survivors. They moved like ghosts, their gazes distant, their spirits broken. In Tirai's, Hana saw the same shadows she felt lurking in her own soul. The whispers followed her like a cruel echo. Repatriate, they'd murmur, a word that dripped with suspicion. The former soldiers were the harshest. She would catch their glares, hear their cutting remarks meant just for her ears. Better to have died than to be captured, they'd say, their voices filled with a venomous pride. Their words were daggers, each one twisting the survivor's guilt that already coiled around her heart like a python. Why me? Why did I live when so many others perished? The question was a constant torment, a wound that refused to close. She had survived. Yes, but for what? To return to this, to be seen as a disgrace, a coward who chose life over honor. The guilt was suffocating. She remembered the faces of her fellow nurses on Saipan, the soldiers who had fallen. Their ghosts haunted her waking moments, and her dreams. Was her survival a betrayal of their sacrifice? The thought was a heavy stone in her gut. She felt adrift, an outsider in her own country, disconnected from the collective grief that seemed to bind everyone else together. One afternoon, while wandering aimlessly through the ruins of what was once a bustling market, she came across a long queue snaking out from a dilapidated building. It was a makeshift community clinic. People waited patiently, their bodies racked with coughs, their skin pale from sickness. She saw children with burns that had been poorly treated, their small faces contorted in pain. She saw elders, frail and trembling, leaning on their children for support. A wave of despair washed over her. The scale of the suffering was overwhelming. As she stood there, frozen, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was the memory of American hands, the hands of the medics in the field hospital on Saipan. They weren't the hands of monsters or enemies. They were steady, gentle, efficient. They had cleaned her wounds, set her broken bones, saved her life. They had worked with a focused calm, a dedication to healing that transcended nationality and war. They hadn't seen a Japanese enemy. They had seen a human being in need of help. Intadmo men watching the sick and injured line up for what little aid was available. Something shifted within Hana. The American hands became a symbol, not of her capture, but of her salvation. They represented a different path, one not defined by death and honor, but by life and service. The whispers of the soldiers began to fade, replaced by the urgent, unspoken pleas of the people in front of her. Her feet moved before her mind had fully caught up. She walked to the entrance of the clinic, her heart pounding a nervous but determined rhythm. A weary-looking doctor, his face etched with fatigue, looked up as she entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice strained. "I'm a nurse," Hana said, the words feeling foreign and yet profoundly right on her tongue. "I trained in American hospitals. I can help." The doctor's eyes widened, with a flicker of hope. He didn't ask about her past, about where she had been or how she had survived. He saw her skills, her willingness, and that was enough. He simply nodded and pointed toward a row of cots. "We need all the help we can get." And so, Hana went to work. The clinic was chaotic, short on supplies, and overflowing with patients. But in the midst of the organized chaos, Hana found her purpose. The skills she had honed in the clean, well-equipped U.S. hospitals were now a lifeline in this broken city. She dressed wounds with a practiced efficiency, administered medications, and soothed fevers. Her hands, once a source of shame, became instruments of healing. With every life she touched, with every child's cry she quieted, the guilt began to loosen its grip. She saw the gratitude in the eyes of a mother whose baby she had saved from a raging fever. She felt the weak, but thankful squeeze of an old man's hand after she cleaned his infected sores. These small victories were anchors in the storm of her past. She was no longer just a repatriate, a survivor marked by shame. She was a nurse. She was a healer. The cruel whispers of the past couldn't compete with the tangible good she was doing in the present. She was saving lives, day after day, in the heart of her ravaged homeland. One evening, as she cleaned the clinic by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, the doctor sat down beside her. "You have good hands, Hana-san," he said quietly. "You've saved more people this week than I can count." Hana looked down at her hands, no longer seeing them as a symbol of her capture, but as a symbol of her purpose. A profound realization washed over her, quiet and certain as the dawn. Survival hadn't been a betrayal. It had been a gift. It was an opportunity to use the life she had been given to ease the suffering of others, to help rebuild not just the buildings of her nation, but the spirits of its people. For the first time since returning to Japan, Hana felt a flicker of something she had thought was lost forever. Hope. The shadows in her eyes began to recede, replaced by the quiet, steady light of purpose. Her journey was far from over, but she was no longer adrift. She had found a place in the ashes, not as a ghost of the past, but as a builder of the future. Thank you for watching this chapter of our story. Decades rolled by, and the world changed. The scars of war began to fade, replaced by the bustling energy of a new Japan. In the heart of Tokyo, a woman who had once braced herself for death became a symbol of life. This is the story of Dr. Hana Kobayashi. From the 1970s through the 90s, Dr. Kobayashi's name became synonymous with healing and hope. She wasn't just a respected physician. She was a powerful voice for Japan's post-war generation, a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She would stand before lecture halls filled with bright-eyed medical students, their faces eager, and she would tell them a truth she had learned in the darkest of times. Many of you will learn the science of medicine in these halls. She would begin, her voice steady and clear. You will learn how to diagnose, how to treat, how to mend broken bones, and fight off disease. But I want to talk to you about something else. I want to talk about courage. A hush would fall over the room. These students, born in an era of peace and prosperity, looked up to her as a hero of a bygone age. "War taught me how to watch people die," she would say, her words cutting through the silence. The statement was blunt, raw, and it always landed with a profound weight. I saw more loss than any young person should ever have to witness. I learned the anatomy of despair, the finality of a life cut short. But that is not what defines me. Because after the war, Mercer taught me how to help them live. She would pause, letting the contrast sink in. This was the core of her message, the pivot upon which her entire life had turned. She had seen the worst of humanity, but she had also witnessed its absolute best. For years, the full story of her survival had been a private memory, a sacred truth she held close. But now, she knew it was a story that needed to be told. It wasn't about heroes and villains, or victors and vanquished. It was about something far more fundamental. When I was a young nurse, she would continue, her gaze sweeping across the young faces before her. I was prepared to die for my country. I believed that was the ultimate act of courage. I believed our enemies were monsters, devoid of compassion. I was wrong. She would tell them about the field hospital, the chaos, the fear. And then she would describe the moment everything changed: the arrival of the American soldiers, not as conquerors, but as healers. The truth that was once hidden, the truth that saved me, is this, she declared, her voice ringing with a conviction forged over a lifetime. The enemy, the very people I was taught to fear and hate, chose compassion. They saw us not as soldiers to be defeated, but as human beings in pain. They chose to heal. They chose humanity. And that single choice, that act of profound mercy, saved my life. She would let that sit for a moment. The idea was radical, even decades later. It challenged everything they had been taught about war and conflict. That choice didn't just save me, Dr. Kobayashi would add, a soft smile gracing her lips. It rippled outwards, through time. Because they saved me, I was able to go on and become a doctor. I was able to save countless others, myself. Every patient I have treated, every life I have helped mend, is a testament to the power of that one act of mercy in a field hospital long ago. Their compassion created a legacy of healing that continues to this day, through me, and now, through all of you. Her final message was always the same. It was a lesson she wanted to echo across time, to be the guiding principle for these future doctors, these future leaders. "Never forget this," she would say, her eyes shining with an unwavering light. "Strength is not in the power to take a life. True strength is found in the will to protect it. Mercy is not a weakness. It is the greatest victory we can ever achieve. It is the victory that builds, that restores, that heals. It is the only victory that truly matters." And as her words faded, the image of who she was became crystal clear. A woman once prepared to die in the name of conflict had dedicated her entire existence to leading others back to life. Her story wasn't just about surviving a war. It was about winning a peace, one patient, one student, one act of compassion at a time. Dr. Hana Kobayashi's life was her ultimate lecture, a powerful, enduring lesson that mercy is, and always will be, the final victory. Thank you for watching.